We've all heard of those horror stories of a tenant who destroys a property and leaves with months of unpaid rent. And most landlords think verifying income and checking credit will keep them safe. But after screening hundreds of tenants over the last decade, I've discovered this 10-step verification process that will catch those nightmare tenants before you give them your keys. Fair warning, this video is on the longer side. I wanted to pack in everything that I learned over the last 11 years owning and managing properties. So after you listen to this first little bit here, just make sure to use the chapters below to skip to the part that you need help with. So step one, and the very first thing you have to do, is you have to understand and know the fair housing laws in your area. So the fair housing laws are what's going to guide our application, our pre-screening process, even what's in our rental ad. So on the federal level, the fair housing laws are things that are common sense: race, sex, religion. These are things that you can't screen against, you can't discriminate against, but on your state, county, and city level, you might have other protected classes and fair housing laws that you have to follow that will guide what you can and cannot screen against. So I recommend either throwing this into ChatGPT and just giving your city and your state and saying, hey, what are the fair housing laws in my area that I have to know about? Or you could check your state or county website. In the description, I'll throw a prompt that you could just copy and paste into ChatGPT that will get you started on the right step to figure out your fair housing laws in your area. So after you have a list of the fair housing laws in your area, the next thing that you have to do is establish your minimum tenant screening criteria for your property. This will be a list of the minimum things that each tenant has to meet in order to get approved. So I'll share a list of what my minimum tenant screening criteria is, but keep in mind, this is what works in my business, but if you have a different subset of properties, you might want lower or higher standards. And then also, if fair housing violates some of the things that I'm going to list, you can't use them in your area. And I know for a fact some of the things that I have you can't do everywhere in the country. So this is my list. I want the verifiable income of everybody 18 years or older to be above 3 times the rental amount. So if rent is $1,000, everybody's gross income needs to be $3,000. Second, credit score of 580 or higher. Third, no evictions or money owed to a landlord in the last 7 years. And this is one I know you can't do everywhere in the country, so check your fair housing laws. Previous housing references that show a pattern of responsibility. So this is me calling and contacting the previous landlords. And then lastly, a background check that inhibits a pattern of responsibility. And I'll touch later on why I'm using that exact verbiage, but that's what I use for my minimum criteria, and I evaluate everybody who applies against that criteria. So after you establish your minimum criteria, the next step is to pre-screen. And pre-screening starts the moment you write your property description that you're gonna post online. In your property description, you should be writing and putting in there your minimum screening criteria. So after you write 2 bed, 1 bath, rent is $1,000, blah, 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 you should be writing whatever you establish in there. 3 times rent required, minimum, 500 credit score, whatever you put it in your rental description. Right there, people who know they don't meet some of those criteria will pre-screen themselves right away. Another place you should put your minimum screening criteria is on your rental application. Right at the top, if you have the ability to do it, and I'll show you how I do my applications in a second and why I'm recommending what I recommend, but if you have the ability to do it, put it right on the top of your rental application so everybody sees it potentially for the second time. So both of those methods will allow somebody to self-screen, but you should actually have a formal pre-screening process. What I like to do is I like to have them do the pre-screening stuff before they schedule a showing. And the way I do it is I use a platform called Show Mojo. I'll throw a link in the description below if you're interested in that. But essentially what that will allow me to do is when somebody schedules a showing, it will first ask them to fill out some pre-screening questions. And if they don't fill them out correctly, it will say, sorry, these are the minimum qualifications. You're still welcome to apply, but unfortunately you can't schedule a showing. Another way to do it is you could just have like a simple Google form or something like that. Alternatively, Alternatively, you could just send them an email and ask them the pre-screening questions before they do something. I just think it fits well before they schedule a showing. But again, you want to eliminate the number of applications that you have that are not qualified. So the next step is to actually get rental applications. And there's lots of different platforms and ways to do that online. ShowMojo that I mentioned earlier, they have a rental application, apartments.com, Zillow. Everybody has one, but to be honest right now, I'm still using a custom one that I just made on a form builder, something very similar to like Google Forms. And the reason that I do a custom application is I think there is a psychology of how you ask some of the questions. And I haven't quite found one that I like as good as the one that I originally was a paper application that I eventually put online. These are a couple questions I think every application should have. Question number 1, what type of animals do you have? Notice I didn't say pets. What type of animals do you have? And it's open-ended. I ask everybody that question, not do you have pets, yes or no? What type of animals do you have? You will get a much better response that way. How long will you live here? Again, another open-ended question, and this question's awesome because people will usually tell you how long they want to live there, and then they'll also start giving you other information that you didn't ask for that could be good and could be bad, but again, you're capturing more information with a question like that. Asking for 2 housing references, and this is one of my biggest gripes with a lot of the pre-made rental applications out there, is they will ask for a certain number of years of rental history, but I specifically want 2 different housing references that I can later on go and contact, and we'll touch about that a little bit later on, but that part is super huge. Asking how they prefer to pay rent. Do you want to pay it in cash? Do you want to pay it online? These are things that are going to let me get a better picture for the tenant, and again, open-ended questions will get people talking, which will later on be conversations you could have when you're going through somebody's application. So after you have some completed rental applications, the next step is something I like to call the first pass. And all this is you take a quick first pass at every application before you get too deep in the screening process. And in this, you're really just trying to catch the big things that will screen people out. So the first thing I look for are the self-reported things that violate my minimum screening criteria. So if somebody states that they had an eviction in their rental application, if somebody states that they don't meet the income requirement, those are some easy things that I could just flag people out for. The next thing I'm looking for is incomplete applications. So on the application, it states that everybody over 18 has to fill out a rental app, and then it also asks who's going to be living there. So if you said that some other people are going to be living there who are over 18 and those people didn't complete a rental application, your application is considered incomplete. And then lastly, in this first pass process, if your state has a free public court record, throw somebody's name in there. It takes 2 seconds and you can see if something in their court record violates your minimum screening criteria. Again, I'm picking these things because they're easy to do and you could do all of these in probably less than like 2 or 3 minutes. If an applicant makes it through the first pass process, the next set of things I'm going to talk about, you really could do in any order, but the order that I'm going to list is easiest for me to hardest. So if I can screen them out on something that's easy for me to do, that's overall less work. So this is the order that I'm choosing. Again, you could also do these things somewhat simultaneously if you want to, but the next thing that I would do is get a credit and background check. And depending on how you do your application, that may have came through already, but if not, that is the very next thing that I would order. As far as where to obtain the credit and background check, this is a place that I feel like is super saturated and there are way too many choices, and unfortunately they're all not the same. In particular, one place I'm going to pick on is Zillow. Zillow's notorious for offering a nationwide background check and then missing things, big things like evictions. And this happens over and over. If you're on Bigger Pockets or any of the landlord Facebook groups, you'll see this happen over and over again. So I definitely wouldn't recommend Zillow. And then in that bucket in general, if there's a place that primarily is a marketing and advertising website like Zillow, and then they just happen to offer background checks, I probably would stay away from them. My number one choice right now by far is rentprep.com for running credit and background checks. If you follow Bigger Pockets, they talk about RentPrep all the time, and it's for good reason. There's a couple of things that set them apart. Number one, an actual person reviews the credit and background checks before they're sent to you. And then also, there's a lot of different databases that pull a bunch of information together. So there are about 30 criminal databases, and somebody could advertise that they do a national background check, and maybe they're only looking at one or two of those databases, but RentPrep looks at a bunch of them. So I've only had good luck and success with them, so I really recommend them. I'll throw a link in the description if you're interested in checking them out. Another place that you can get credit and background checks that I feel like nobody talks about is your local apartment association or your local real estate investing association. You can get awesome rates and pretty good services if you check them out. So I would check out the one in your area and see if it's something that they offer. The next step is I like to Google and Facebook everybody. And very rarely can you deny somebody based on what you're finding on Google and Facebook. But what you want to do is you want to generate conversation starters. So this is a very common scenario. Somebody lists that they have no pets on their application, and then you go to their Facebook and it's a picture of them and their dog. Yeah, I can't deny somebody based on that Facebook profile picture, but it's a great conversation starter and something to dig into deeper. Next, petscreening.com. I send everybody to petscreening.com, whether they have an animal or not. If they don't have an animal, it's like a 2-second thing. But if they do have an animal, whether it's a pet, a emotional support animal, or a service animal, petscreening.com will ask a lot of questions to protect you as a property owner. If they just have a regular pet, it's going to ask good questions about vaccination records, veterinary records, things like that. And those are the things that are going to separate the good pet owners from the bad pet owners, which will separate the pets that do damage and don't do damage. When it comes to emotional support animals, it's asking things like verifying the relationship between the provider and the person saying they need the ESA and making sure that is up to date within the last year, all that good stuff. I'll have a whole video about petscreening.com later, but it is a awesome tool and I highly recommend adding it in your workflow. Next, verifying housing references. This is one of the most important steps, and it baffles me how many people just skip this step. You'll realize this is actually a little bit in the tail end of the process, and part of the reason people skip it is a little bit of work, but I'm telling you, it's worth it. Keep in mind, there are a couple states where you cannot screen people based on their previous housing references. If you live in one of those states, this is not applicable to you, but it's not most of us. Before I contact anybody, I just like to make sure that the information that the tenant wrote on the application is correct. So I'll verify ownership by using my county website just to see who the owner of the property is, make sure that matches. And then as far as verifying the phone number, I like to use a website called truthpeoplesearch.com. Again, I'll throw a link in the description, but this will allow me to match a person or a business up to a phone number to make sure that they gave me the correct phone number. After I verify everything is correct, the next thing I like to do is actually call these people and get them on the phone. Yes, I know that sucks, but call them and get them on the phone. And if they're a bigger property management company, they might make me email them anyway, but I like to make initial contact on the phone. And if I can get the information right away, always ask your questions, because sometimes if people are going to email you back, it takes a little bit. When I'm talking to a previous landlord, I have about a dozen questions that I like to ask, but these ones are probably the ones that have given me the most bang for my buck. Question number 1, did they pay their portion of the utilities? I love asking that question because usually if they're not paying their portion of the utilities, they're usually not paying their rent, and there's usually a bunch of other stuff going on. So that's a good question. Another question I like to ask is, what pets did they have? Because if at their previous place they had a dog and then they list that they don't have a dog with you, I promise you that dog is coming, whether it's on their application or not. And then the last question is, did they get all their deposit back? Because again, if they didn't, that's indicative of something else bigger going on. So I love that all-encompassing, easy question. So again, I'm asking other questions, like I'm verifying the rental amount and the leasing dates and all that good jazz. But the 3 questions I just mentioned before, those usually provide me some of the most unique and helpful answers. So everybody's different, but I like to at least get one housing reference, and my choice, if I can get it, is the previous landlord. So not the place that they're living currently, but the place before that, because that person has no stake in the game. So you usually get more honest results. Next up, verifying income. So when it comes to income, I like to get at least 2 data points to verify their income. So on my application and on a lot of them, you might have a place where people can upload a document like a W-2 or a paycheck stub. So that's what's one data point, but I like to get another data point. So depending on how you do your credit check, some credit checks are providing employment information and income information, and that information is actually getting better and better. Some people are like connecting to people's bank accounts and seeing transactions come through from their employer. So that is pretty cool. But I'm still old school and I like to actually get on the phone and call employers. If you're calling an employer, a couple tips. One, try not to get HR, because if you get HR, they'll make you go through a very formal process. I like to just call and try to ask for that person's manager or supervisor, which I got that information from my application. And these are the general questions that I like to ask. 1, do they work there? Yes or no? Is their position considered temporary? And then to actually verify their income, I will usually offer that information first. I'll say so-and-so said they make about blank. Is that correct? Yes or no? You usually get a much better answer than saying, how much does so-and-so make? Because either they don't know or they don't want to tell you. And then lastly, you know me, I like open-ended questions. So I will usually say, is there anything else I should know about the applicant? And again, I can't really deny somebody on that question, but it's a conversation starter where I can go, if they tell me something that is concerning, I can go now ask the tenant about it and get more information. So that's my process in a nutshell. And I know I went through a lot of things, and this is just tenant screening. I know as a landlord, there are so many other things that you have to do. So that's why on this channel, I cover all of it. So if you're serious about your investing this year, make sure to hit subscribe and check out the next video. As always, I'll see you there.